We're joined now by Alan Greenwald, who is the president of AF Evans, which has managed to develop affordable housing profitably, which is what just intrigued me about the profile they did of you in the San Francisco Business Times.
Right.
We've had developers here. Nonprofits have a little easier time. They use HUD money, federal dollars. But you and the Evans Company have managed to make it a mission to produce affordable and below-market housing that works within a for-profit corporation, and that's why I wanted you on board here. First of all, congratulations, because you took over from a redevelopment agency director, Arthur Evans.
Right.
And so now, how have things changed since you became the CEO?
Well, I think that we've gone through a transition period from what I think of as a founder-centric company. Art founded the company 30 years ago when he left the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency. Still has a very strong hand in the business. He's chairman of the board. He's retired, but he's very present and very interested in what's going on in the company. So part of what we're doing is going through a transition so that people become more comfortable working with a new leader who's come in with some new ideas, but also very much a wish to maintain the core values that made the company what it was and has made it so successful.
You really bring the kind of creativity that does exist within the law, because you are an attorney. You studied here,
right?
And you studied planning as well.
That's right.
So you bring a little different dimension, because the world we're in right now, new projects are formed with institutional investors, and in this case the government for nonprofits. There's always a major capital source to make these projects work, but you're doing it without the HUD money. I guess one of the first questions I had, does it turn out that your really profitable projects that you do subsidize your affordable housing, or do these projects stand on their own?
I would say the projects very much stand on their own. One of the things that Art really wanted me to take a look at, because the company had grown and was doing a broader variety of housing than just the affordable housing that the company started with. And because it was becoming, as you point out, so much more difficult to build profitable projects in the Bay Area, given land costs, regulatory constraints, all the things that we all know make it difficult, to look for capital sources and look for inventive methods of financing projects that could put people in places.
And you're doing that. You're building affordable housing, and in some cases you're building below market housing within a profit environment. So let's talk. I wanted you to be here because I want personally to understand. Maybe we could take a deal or two and,
sure.
and sort of dissect it a little bit and show how you're doing this. You can choose the project you'd like to talk about.
Well, let me give you a couple examples. Actually, if we just talk about what's going on in San Francisco,
sure.
We have a number of different things that we're doing, and in some ways they represent they're a microcosm of what we've been doing more broadly throughout the Bay Area and the Pacific Northwest. In San Francisco right now, for example, we have a project under construction at 888 7th Street. That project, while it's a single building, represents three different kinds of housing that we've been providing. One, and it's a 224-unit project. A small number of those are regular market rate condos that anybody can walk in off the street and buy.
Roughly priced $600-700?
It's a little bit early to say right now because they're not going to be ready, but
sure.
they're probably up to $600,000.
Sure.
That's what I'd guess.
Okay.
The next component is what we call workforce housing, and that is housing that we're financing with an equity fund that we've created that allows us, because it's an inexpensive source of private capital, no city subsidy or no public subsidies involved, to sell market rate condos at below market prices, roughly 15% below market, to people whose incomes are in the middle range. Mm-hmm. People who've been priced out of close-in housing, need to drive 2 hours, can live at 888 7th Street for the same price they might pay in Dublin, for example. The third group are below market rate housing. Those are housing units that are required by the city in all residential properties mm-hmm. to be built in order to get permission to build the market rate units. So we have all these three kinds of housing in just one project.
Will the residents interact? Or do you, if I may, do you have to block off different populations just because you couldn't sell the market rate housing because of the perception of inclusionary housing being perhaps a different group of people? Or does everyone, are the units all mixed?
Our experience thus far has been that in most cases we can build projects that are very well integrated, that have common facilities that everyone is comfortable using. Part of what we are really about is to provide community for multiple income types.
Is there your cost per square foot that you can assign to a project like that? That's just a model or a benchmark? And I'll tell you why in a moment, because I do know what the benchmark is for federally funded new housing, affordable housing in San Francisco. I mean, it's approaches a very high figure, $300, $400, $500 sometimes.
Sure.
Because of all the, there's a lot of restrictions on the money. The federal government demands a lot for that money. Do you have a figure?
Well, there's an important point to make here. Rather than pointing you to a specific figure, what I would say is that given what usually are the constraints on a developer, land costs, regulatory costs, legal costs, financing costs, construction costs, those generally, and I'll go back to an exception in a minute, cost the same whether you're building a high-end condo or very inexpensive housing. Some of those things just don't change.
I see.
The way that we've made the workforce housing, for example, less expensive is that we're working with banks and insurance companies who are looking for a reasonable return, not a high profit, and for community reinvestment credit.
Right,
and through that combination, that allows us to get less expensive capital, less expensive housing.
At some point, some time ago, was it a state or federal mandate, effectively, or was it just a suggestion that the lending institutions should reinvest back into the community?
That's the result of federal legislation.
It is federal legislation, so it's required.
Right.
That banks have to give back, and they left it somewhat open on how that happens?
I think there's been a very complicated regulatory bureaucratic structure that's grown up, but originally it was just a very broadly stated policy.
That's what I understand, and they were actually looking for ideas at one point. And now you have, especially with your background, you were with the Fannie Mae, you did Director of Multifamily Structured Transactions.
Right.
You understood the dynamics here, and you've come up with a fund concept, which we often see in venture capital or hedge funds and investment funds. And that allows, therefore, you to borrow that money and bring the product in, therefore, below market.
That's right.
Is this a model that can be duplicated?
Absolutely. What we did was we spent a fair amount of time in Washington, D.C., and what I might add is some very ugly summer weather, talking to the Federal Reserve, talking to the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, a number of regulatory institutions that are responsible for determining this investment credit for banks and thrifts. Figuring out with them what would qualify as an investment. And so we designed the fund so that we were building in certain areas, building to certain kinds of income levels, so that investors would get the kind of credit they were looking for, because frankly, even though they're looking for a return, the kind of return they're getting from our projects in this case would not be enough to motivate them by itself.
Sure, but it satisfies their requirements.
Well, we think so.
We think so. Let me ask you this.
No promises.
The return for your company on these projects,
that's right,
are they equivalent to some of your higher end developments in other parts of the West, or do you also take a lesser return?
You've hit the nail on the head. The way this works is that we are one of the investors and we're taking a lower profit as well.
So why do you do that?
Well, for one thing, our company has always had a passion for putting housing where it needs to be, but we are, as you point out, for profit.
Yeah.
We do it because it is less risky than building high-end condos in this market. We think that
because they sell quicker?
Because they sell quicker, and because there is a huge market for them.
Yes, there is.
So that we feel like we're providing something that is, I don't want to call it a commodity because every project that we do is unique, but we're providing something that's very much in demand, and as everybody knows, things that are in demand sell quickly, therefore it's less risky, we're not going to be stuck with it.
So the return may not be as great as a luxury apartment complex, but when you take all the factors together, do you get fast track? Do these projects get put on fast track at the local planning agencies and local city councils or board of supervisors because they're solving an important need?
I'd say that varies greatly by what community you're talking about.
San Francisco.
San Francisco, I would say that we're not fast-tracked. Let me give you a contrasting example, though, and it's also a very good example of talking about working in urbanizing communities that were formerly considered suburbs but now are experiencing urban kinds of issues. City of Pittsburgh, California, had 3 blocks of vacant land downtown. They very much wanted to create a thriving residential commercial downtown. We have worked with them, and they have absolutely fast-tracked all the approvals to build what is now going to be 3 blocks of retail, restaurant, and workforce housing downtown.
That's great. It's a town that deserves it.
We're very excited about that.
But San Francisco, you would think, for all the calls for affordable housing and below market housing for the workforce,
right,
which they, I mean those who complain, why can't we create a fast track for this kind of housing that would induce more developers to come in like yourselves and use the model that you created, maybe even tap into the fund that you're creating, expand the fund? There's just not that motivation.
Well, I wouldn't say there's a lack of motivation. Mayor Newsom came to the groundbreaking for the 888 7th Street project, was very excited about it, and is very supportive for the service that we're providing, particularly given that this product doesn't require any city subsidy.
Yes.
As we all know, it's very complicated to change a regulatory process, and I don't want to suggest in any way the city hasn't been anything but cooperative in approving them, but I think it's difficult to get any locality to create a special process.
I believe in that. I wish they would. I wish they would consider that. Now you're doing a real controversial project. I want to bring it up at Laguna, which is the old UC Extension.
Right.
And then again, your creativity, you yourself, I think personally, and your knowledge of how to structure the deal. Tell us about how that worked out, because it was headed towards a brick wall, and now it seems feasible at this point.
Well, let's separate out financial feasibility from political feasibility.
All right, very good.
We are a long way towards solving the political feasibility issue, I think. We have spent a great deal of time in the community there. We've spent a great deal of time with local political leaders. I would say we very much over the last 6 to 8 weeks have turned a corner in terms of public support for that project.
Yes.
We have, and it's also a very good example of what we're describing in terms of kind of housing we provide. That's a project which will have approximately 400 units of housing. They will be rental, which is very unusual for San Francisco at this point in our cycle. They will have 20% affordable units, which is far in excess of what the city requirement is.
Yes.
There will be an 80-unit LGBT seniors rental project, which we're doing in conjunction with Open House. We'll have a community park, a community center, a community garden. We'll be recreating the opening where Waller Street used to come through that site. We're now reopening to the community. It's a project that as it's developed over time has become one that's very integrated with the fabric of the community and with the city.
Well, and it will include some of your financing?
It will not include workforce housing financing because it is rental, and the workforce equity only goes for sale housing.
Well, we're going to watch that, and we'll probably like to see you come back as that project unfolds.
We'd be excited to talk about it.
Alan Greenwald, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Visit our website at www.sfunscripted.com.